Gen 2's cover legendary Lugia, also known as one of the cover Pokémon for the Smogon logo, is one of the most prominent defensive walls in Pokémon history. Lugia's bulk, typing and move pool has always made Lugia the Pokémon that keeps the most dangerous Pokémon in check. Lugia is even referred to as the Great Wall because of how bulky it is. There's really nothing like it, and it's always been a staple as a defensive presence in the Ubers tier. Lugia has always been an A tier Pokémon, or at the least a B tier Pokémon in the Ubers tier, because of these great traits. However, this changed with its reintroduction into Generation 8. Lugia went from the Great Wall, that you had to keep in mind when building a team, to a Pokémon that is pretty much unviable. In Gen 8 Ubers, Lugia is ranked a D tier Pokémon. A D tier Pokémon is basically a Pokémon that's ranked Ubers, but it's not actually good in the Ubers tier. Other examples include the infamous Genesect. Even Xatu and Tangrowth are ranked higher than Lugia. But how is this possible? How did a Pokémon once referred to as the Great Wall fall from a prominent defensive staple to an unviable Pokémon in one generation? Before we talk about why Lugia fell down, it's important to actually talk about what made it so good in the past. Lugia possesses some of the greatest bulk in the game, with its very high defensive stats at base 130 and 154 respectively, as well as a very high base HP stat of 106. Unlike most defensive oriented Pokémon, Lugia has some decent offensive stats too, and is also very fast with its 110 base speed stat, which is a big deal as it allows Lugia to outspeed other walls and even some offensive Pokémon too, especially if they don't invest in speed that much. It's extremely difficult to one-hit kill Lugia at full health, and with enough speed investment it can easily outspeed common base 90 speed threats like Groudon. This speed investment makes Lugia significantly harder to take down, as it can move first and heal itself up with Roost if it needed. Since Lugia is naturally very bulky, it can actually afford to invest in speed, not to mention that Lugia could threaten back these Pokémon with a super effective Ice Beam. This is another notable move that makes Lugia as great as it is. Ice Beam is an excellent move that can threaten the majority of Uber's Pokémon, because a lot of them are Dragon types. Uninvested 90 base special attack gets the job done. It doesn't make Lugia a passive wall that can be easily taken advantage of. Lugia is also an excellent user of the move Toxic. This allows Lugia to cripple the enemy team, by either putting their offensive threats on a timer or by limiting the effectiveness of their defensive backbones. Lugia could even enhance its walling capabilities by using a move like Reflect or Light Screen to not only support itself, but also its teammates by reducing incoming damage. Lugia's ability Pressure is also pretty good on the defensive wall and deserves some credit. Pressure allows Lugia to stall out certain Pokémon, especially those with moves that have low PP. Even with all of these amazing defensive traits, Lugia could go more offensively with its great speed tier and respectable offensive stats. It can make use of calm mindsets to turn itself into a great bulky sweeper, or even a wall breaker with choice packs. In Gen 5, Lugia even gained access to the move Dragon Tail, which could be used as an alternative to Whirlwind. And with the release of Pokemon Black 2 and White 2, Lugia also gained one of the greatest defensive abilities in the game, Multi-Skill. Multi-Skill halves all incoming damage if the Pokemon is at full health, greatly enhancing Lugia's role as a defensive wall. But even before it gained this ability, Lugia was already an incredible defensive presence. With Lugia being so fast, it could make good use of the ability by moving first and restoring itself to full health and having the damage from the target's next move. Not to mention it could remove its flying typing to limit the damage of otherwise super effective moves. Multi-Skill did however have one big problem, which is Stealth Rock. Stealth Rock is very common in singles as it heavily punishes switching, which there is a lot of. Not to mention the additional damage it deals to rock weak Pokemon. With Heavy Duty Boots not being a thing in past generations, it wasn't that difficult to break Multi-Skill with Stealth Rock, rendering the ability useless on switching. But even with Stealth Rock being as prominent as it is, Lugia still remained a great defensive Pokemon. Even with all of these great traits, Lugia had its fair share of problems. Startle Shock is an obvious problem as it takes 25% upon switching in and reduces its ability to take hits as easily as it would like. Not to mention multi-skill being affected as we talked about. Aside from that, Toxic is a common move in the metagame that can cripple Lugia as it is forced to heal up more often and is punished for staying in multiple turns, making walling certain offensive threats more difficult. Toxic also makes taking advantage of multi-skill quite difficult. Lugia does also not appreciate knockoff receiving a massive buff, as it is weak to it. But even with these problems, Lugia was still great. Heavy Duty Boots was even introduced in Generation 8, which allowed Lugia to avoid Stealth Rock damage and preserve multi-skill, yet it is at its lowest point in this generation. Lugia is still a great wall that can take on dangerous Pokemon like Rayquaza, Groudon and Zygarde, but it has some very big problems, most notably its matchup against common meta threats. Lugia matches up very poorly against a lot of great Pokemon in the Gen 8 Ubers tier. Yveltal is the most commonly used Pokemon in the tier with an usage rate above 70%. Yveltal's Dark Aura boosted Dark moves can easily 2-hit kill Lugia if it is running an offensive set and still do good damage if it is more defensive oriented. Defensive sets also sometimes run Toxic as a move, which is a big problem for Lugia. Knockoff is also a staple on Yveltal, which means not only will it deal massive damage, but get rid of Lugia's Heavy Duty Boots. Yveltal is also usually faster than Lugia and can shut it down with Taunt. Of course, with Duskmane is another very commonly used Pokemon in the tier that can easily put Lugia 1-on-1. Necrozma with Duskmane's Steel typing allows it to shrug off an incoming Ice Beam and Toxic, and it can threaten Lugia with Steel Strike, which ignores multi-skill. This Pokemon can also cripple Lugia with status moves like Thunder Wave and Toxic. It can use Knockoff and set up Stealth Rock in front of it without having to fear much, while offensive variants can easily use the setup fodder with Dragon Dance. Ghost types, most notably Calyrex Shadow and Marshadow, are also very strong and common in the tier. These Pokemon can easily 2-hit kill Lugia even through multi-skill, and they take little from Ice Beam. Even more niche options like both forms of Giratina can beat Lugia with status and strong ghost moves respectively. Ferrothorn is also a very prevalent Steel type in the meta that can take advantage of Lugia and shrug off its attacks. Lugia is also severely outclassed by some of these Pokemon. Necrozma, Duskmane and Lunala are better walls that share the Psychic typing, but have a much better secondary typing with Steel and Ghost respectively. Even on hard stall teams, Lugia's niche is outclassed by Giratina, which is overall bulkier and provides more utility. In Gen 8 Ubers, Lugia just matches up very poorly against a lot of common Pokemon, and its passive nature can be easy to take advantage of as a result. The prominence of moves like Toxic and Knockoff also makes Lugia's role as a defensive wall very difficult, and it's just outclassed by a lot of Pokemon too. Lugia's bulk, typing and utility are just not as valuable as they once were in metagames where Dragon types were so common and where less alternatives were available. The increased power creep also only introduced more Pokemon that could take on Lugia. Even in Gen 9 I fear that Lugia will not be great if it were to return, even if other Pokemon like Yveltal and Necrozma Duskmane are absent. Gen 9 sees some massive power creep, and Pokemon like Miraidon, Zacian Ground, Fluttermane, Giratina Origin, and Kingambit are very prevalent in the Gen 9 Ubers metagame. These are all Pokemon that quite easily beat Lugia. This video topic was the winner of a poll I recently put up with other potential video topics as well. To the people that voted for Genesect, don't worry, as I'm also planning on making a video about that, as I do find it a very interesting subject to cover. Let me know your thoughts about the fall of Lugia in Gen 8. Do you think it will be good if it returns to Gen 9? Let me know down below in the comments. If you want to see more content like this, you can let me know by liking the video and subscribe to the channel if you're new. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.